Thank you. Thank you for joining us today for a public briefing on HB 194. This bill is sponsored by Representative Wes Allen, and it was passed on Thursday, March 10th, by the Alabama House of Representatives. HB 194 ultimately would make it illegal for grassroots organizations to collaborate and coordinate with local elections officials to educate and help voters to get out the vote. Now, this ultimately means that, churches, your nonprofits, and other civic organizations would be prohibited from doing the work to fill in the gaps and helping Alabamians have the resources and raise awareness around voting. Any person who violates this law could be charged with a Class B misdemeanor offense. And in Alabama, a Class B misdemeanor it could result in a jail time of up to 6 months and fines of up to $3,000. Now, this bill comes at a time where we are seeing election centers around the country, including in Alabama, experience staff and resource shortages. So today, we wanted to make sure that we raise awareness in the public as to why we consider this a bad bill. Today's briefing is sponsored by the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition in collaboration with Alabama Values Progress. Today, we'll hear from speakers who will frame the issues with the bill through a practical lens of either an organizer or someone who conducts voter education outreach. Or someone who can speak to how being a direct recipient of voter education and outreach has helped them become more civic minded and get involved in our state's democracy. Each speaker will have about 5 to 8 minutes to speak, and after which we will open it up for Q&A. So please drop your questions and comments in the chat, whether you're watching live via Facebook or live via YouTube. We'll start off the discussion today with Evan Milligan, the Executive Director of Alabama Forward, our state civic table.
Hey, good morning, Anisha, and good morning, Sam, Kathy, Rodrisha. It's good to be with y'all this morning. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. I'm talking to you today. I'm sitting inside one of the offices on the first floor of Sidney Lanier High School. My coworker, Kadita, and I are here this morning to speak with some of the students. They're having Social Justice Week, where they're talking about using their voices and just really the history of advocacy and First Amendment and all of the things that we celebrate. And, being here with them, this is the high school where I graduated. And, it was announced recently that this building, the building, which is, over 100 years old, will be closed in about 3 years because our local public school system doesn't have the funding to maintain it. We call it the castle. It's a building that, not many buildings really look like this. And I think I just want to use that as a backdrop for what I want to say now about HB 194. In many countries in the world, if you have a building that's over 100 years old, that has very unique architecture and a community of students. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. When you have communities of students and families associated with that institution for years, that would be something that the local government or state government resources would be made available to preserve. And so it's definitely been a blow to our community to know that this institution, we basically don't have the funds to make it cost effective to preserve it. And so there's a consolidation of this high school with another high school. And some folks are worried about how that'll play out on the ground. And, we're hopeful that our students will find a way to make that make sense. But I think it's similar in terms of what we're doing with our democratic institutions. And so we have a system in this country where freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, our Bill of Rights, those are things that are fundamental to our American identity. Also, being a majoritarian democracy, but also being a democracy that has constitutionally protected rights for its citizens. And so, for ethnic minorities, religious minorities, we're a unique country in that way, that we've been able to, despite civil war and many movements, continue to advance in the direction of expanding those democratic freedoms. And now we're at a period of time where, similar to, the decision to what the place we're in with this building, we're kind of abandoning some of the most unique aspects of our culture and of our democratic institutions. So HB 194 is another example of that. Really trying to limit the extent to which civic organizations can educate their constituents and can even try to fill in some of the gaps that our election systems have left there due to our underfunding of our democratic institutions. And so this bill would really try to drive a wedge in between groups that want to pick up some of the slack and that want to fill in that gap. And then, it would drive a wedge between those groups and then those community members that might really appreciate those resources. And I would just urge everyone listening here to let your legislators know that this is not a bill that reflects your best interests. And regardless of what happens with it, I would urge everyone to really think about how this is a pattern right now of bills that are really undermining what our democracy, what our democratic institutions actually exist to do. We've seen an example of that with the electoral maps, the congressional electoral maps, state electoral maps that that were voted out of the legislature and signed into law by the governor. We see that as an example with the response to critical race theory. We see that as an example right now with things that are happening with respect to reproductive rights. Now we see legislatures really taking it upon themselves to define norms and define things that prior to, historically have really been defined by professional associations or had already been resolved by courts. We see our state legislature and others in our region are really taking a step in the other direction to ensure that there are fewer voices in our democratic tradition. And this is concerning because our country is becoming more multi-ethnic, more multicultural. Our state is becoming more non-white. The fastest growing populations in our state are Black, Latinx, AAPI, multiracial, indigenous. And so right as we're entering an era where we could be expanding participation, we're seeing our legislature move in a direction of contracting and limiting space. And we're concerned about the way that that's racialized and the way that that's happening now at a moment where there's a demographic shift in this country, because we know that as Alabamians, we believe that our neighbors of all races should be participating in our process, and that there should be more space to engage with our neighbors and with our communities. And so that's what we're trying to do in our coalition with Alabama Forward, is to really support our member organizations and our ally groups that work around the state to celebrate the tradition of democracy, to protect the traditions of democracy. And we're excited to be here today to support this conversation around our opposition to HB 194.
Thank you. Thank you, Evan. Thank you so much for sharing, just providing insight on the role that grassroots and civic organizations have played and continue to play in voter education and outreach efforts, and just discussing the ramifications of this bill. At this time, we will hear from Kathy Jones, President of the League of Women Voters, Alabama.
Good morning. Thank you for having me online today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about HB 194. And I wanted to start with talking about why we noticed this bill. One of the things that we've been doing on our advocacy side of the organization is looking at the bills that relate to voting and voting rights and trying to understand the intent behind them. The language is really confusing. When you start looking at bills, you try to understand what some of the words mean. And one of the terms that really struck me about this HB 194 was the word personal services. I am a retired civil servant. And so one of the things that I have always heard is you shall not have a personal services contractor. And what that means is you have someone doing your job for you, doing basically whatever you tell them to go do. In the terminology of this bill, the word personal services, when Wes Allen says he's only trying to limit money, that's different. When he talks about personal services, he's talking about people who are doing the job that the election officials, are either don't have the resources to do or just aren't doing. One of the things that I see the voting rights organizations in the state of Alabama doing are going out trying to fill the gaps. There's a lot of needs in this state to get students registered before they turn 18 so that they'll be ready to vote when they turn 18. They can get registered at 17 and a half. They can apply to register. We've been going into high schools as the League of Women Voters for at least 3 or 4 years now, getting people registered at 17 and a half. And we've gotten thousands of high school seniors ready so that they can vote. The minute they turn 18, they're ready to go. You're also seeing limits on things that we're doing to try to help citizens work their way through the voting rights restoration process. In several cases, we've actually found where this registrar has not properly processed the people's application for a serve. There's a question, they'll see a conviction, and whatever they're seeing on their screen just doesn't look right. We've actually gone in and talked to the registrars and gotten those turned around. So, we're working as a collaboration, to help make people's opportunities to vote easier, filling in the gaps that are not being provided by the state of Alabama right now. There's so many things. I could go down the list, with the voter drives, the absentee election process. We've worked with the absentee election circuit clerk to help understand the voter ID requirements, to make sure that when we had drive-up voter services clinics during 2020, that we actually were providing copies of the driver's license that the circuit clerk would accept. We provided stamps for people who can't afford to have stamps. We've gone in to people when they're sitting at home in home health situations and help them get their affidavit envelopes witnessed. There's a lot of just services that we're providing. When you look at the word personal services, that was the key for me. That this was actually not just about money. It's not just about Zuckerbucks. This is about an attack on the ability of people who are trying to provide services to citizens in Alabama. I had a phone conversation with Secretary of State Merrill back in the middle of February, and I was not talking about HB 14, this bill, but he said, "Well, Kathy, we're opposed to this bill, which would make it illegal for the league to do what it does," which just really kind of keyed me up that, I wasn't even talking to him about that. And at that point, I realized that, we needed to speak up, because if we didn't, and this bill passed, then we would all be very sad that we hadn't pushed back against the darkness, which this bill does not represent what democracy should be in Alabama. And just as an example of things that I've already listed out, a few of the things that I think it would impact, but I believe that if you could just eliminate that personal services terminology, then you would be focusing it on what Wes Allen is saying he's against, which is money. If you leave the personal services wording in there, then you're leaving it up for interpretation, which is you could say that they're only going to, it's only going to punish the elected officials and their staff, which is bad enough. But there could be some people that are going to interpret it to say that it also affects people who are coming in as citizens or organizations trying to help. And so that's where I feel like this is a bad bill, and it's going to cause harm, and it just either needs to go away or it needs to be fixed. And so I think that was pretty much where we were coming from. And I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for providing that clarification and just really getting into the language of the bill. I think that's important to help break those frames of misinformation and disinformation and just saying, hey, this is what the bill says and this is the ramifications of that. And thank you also for just providing examples, everyday examples of how the League and other organizations, the role that you all play in filling these gaps and how this bill would hinder that. Okay. At this time, we will hear from Rodrisha Rushaw, who is the Executive Director of the Ordinary People Society.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rodrisha Rushaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Ordinary People Society. I apologize for my background, but I'm on the ground as always, constantly moving in my vehicle to make sure that we are out speaking to our community, educating our community. And so I'm so glad to be here amongst all of our partners and our constituents talking about this bad bill, because that's exactly what it is. Has House Bill 194. Had a chance this week as we were ending Selma to link up with the League of Women Voters and speak more with other partnering organizations such as ACLU and other organizations about this bill in particularly. And so where I'm coming from is more on a framework of how it will affect the folks on the ground, those formerly currently incarcerated and people in need of casting their votes. And so what we're looking at is something that is going to be detrimental to the movement that we've been working on for so many decades, and so many organizers before us has been fighting to work with our local officials and our legislators to make sure that we are providing great, outstanding voter education to our community. And this bill would put a barrier on the relationships that we have formed with local officials over the last several decades. The resources, stopping the funding and the resources where the resources are already scarce in the state of Alabama, is going to be a big mark on how we do registrations in the jails, how we do that in the prisons, and how we do it on the ground. As we know, in the last 2 years, TOPS has worked with Alabama Election Protection Network, with the network that we started to end voter intimidation. And in that, some of the funding that we even received for certain things like laptops and phone lines through Chan Zuckerberg, which is CZI, this type of bill bans those kind of foundations and private donors from being able to donate to not only just local officials, but also getting the money to the ground to grassroots organizations such as us. And then we seen in the last election, we actually moved over 20,000 formerly incarcerated people to vote just because of that call center. And so I'm here to express the harm that is going to be done, because we're seeing voter intimidation everywhere. And intimidation is on every level. In the state of Florida, I was just talking to Representative Hart, where they just passed a bill that you cannot protest, right? And so you'll be criminalized for that. And even in this bill, there's a criminalization component to it. And so we have to look at all the factors that are leading up to the 2022 elections. And we all knew that, things would come this way, but we didn't think that Alabama would be hit with a bill such as this that would stop some of the resources. And so, as we know, we have last year, 2019, was the first year that it was stated on the ballot that people can vote inside a prison while incarcerated, as long as they have a crime not involving moral turpitude. And that was a law that was passed by Pastor Kenneth Glasgow, which is Glasgow versus Allen. You can look that up yourself if you would like. Us needing those resources to get into those jails to make sure that their rights to votes are there. I always tell people when we speak, TOPS always makes it very clear that you are not a citizen, not by your birth certificate, not by your driver's license. You're not a citizen until you actually cast your vote. When you become an active voter, that's what makes you a citizen in the United States. And so what we're saying here is that if we let this bill pass, we have thousands of people who are no longer considered citizens because they're not able to cast their vote because they may have not been able to get or receive information of their voting right. And so that is 10 steps backwards in the state of Alabama. That is something that we will not allow to happen on the ground. We will fight this bill. I had a conversation recently as well, Kathy, with Mr. Merrill, and he stated that he wasn't really for it. And we understand that in this bill, there still has to be some clarification. But what I'm putting out today is that it is a bad bill. Just want to share with everybody that has been doing voter engagement, whether it be from the clergy standpoint, from the church faith base, whether it be through an organization, or whether it be you're just a great citizen out there sharing a button of voting or something to that measure. We will all be impacted by this if it passes. So we must continue to bring awareness and to educate our communities to push back on House Bill 194. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rodrisha, for that call to action. And thank you for, letting the public know that this is what this bill means, but we're not going to stand for it. We're going to fight, and this is how. So thank you. Okay, at this time, we will hear from Sam Robson, who is the ambassador for the Andrew Goldman Foundation for Vote Everywhere with the University of Alabama.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Robson. I'm a student at the University of Alabama, but I'm originally a transplant from Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is a pretty flawed state, but there just aren't a lot of votes that need to be suppressed. So I kind of had an idealized notion of what voter education work looked like before I headed to Alabama. In high school, I literally had a teacher running for public office. I was sort of in an environment of civic engagement, and I sort of grew myself in that environment because I was like a total political nerd as well. But when I got to Alabama, nothing was easy the way it was in Oklahoma. We couldn't just collect forms and drop them off at a box somewhere. There were just constant little things at every corner designed to make it more difficult. Even now, when I've been registering people for 2 years here on campus, I'm still asking Allie, our president, little questions about the registration forms and what to do here and what to do here. Just because if anything is slightly wrong, or sometimes even if something isn't wrong, but it's just not the way the state likes it, then that person won't get to vote in an election. The second week, I was a fresh-faced freshman. I was already learning that our club was trying to sue the Secretary of State's office because they were refusing to let students use digital ACT cards at the election. And we did eventually get them to confirm that students could use digital ACT cards, that's our student IDs, for the 2020 election. They changed the signature requirements for absentee ballots in 2020 back and forth probably 3 times. It was a mess just to communicate it to our members how the policy worked, much less people who needed an absentee ballot. We're currently fighting a local proposal that the counselor who drafted it explicitly said was to stave off quote unquote temporary voters by changing the election date to when students aren't on campus, so that they won't vote in our Tuscaloosa local election. There are areas at every corner where people are trying to disenfranchise students and really just everyone in the state as a whole. But this is the first time I've seen that the state has tried to actually criminalize this type of work that we're doing. A couple of incidents over the past year, which I believe would have involved criminal activity, had this law been passed. First, we had a tabling event with the Board of Registrars. I believe the Board of Registrars actually had like an internal policy that they had to visit college campuses. And I sat out there with a lady from the Board of Registrars helping to register voters using our Andrew Goodman Foundation Register to Vote banner, our UA funds printed voter registration applications, and our nice patriotic balloons. She would potentially be subject to jail time for that. I also ran restoration clinics for disenfranchised felons just last week, actually. That would violate Section 1B, the personal services provision. In 2017, Alabama clarified which law or which convictions lead felons to be disenfranchised or to lose the right to vote and how they can get that back. Before then, it was just sort of up to the individual registrars. but they didn't tell anyone who was now made eligible because of this policy that they were made eligible of it. And because of that, we're still seeing about 8% of the voting age population disenfranchised by this policy. We spoke to several people who had been told by that by the Pardons and Paroles office that we were tabling at that they were ineligible to vote. Whenever we looked it up in Alicourt, clear as day, they had never lost their right to vote. Some of these convictions even happened after 2017. The state is not completing the role of voter education. And in fact, it's not even letting third parties do it in the status quo, really. Our event at Pardons and Paroles was supposed to be actually in the building. We were planning to use their Wi-Fi, et cetera. That was all set up. But 3 days before it, their legal team canceled on us because of something about ongoing litigation and probably something related to this bill now that we're seeing it come out. And still, several employees there would have violated the law that day by informing people about our stand, which was set up outside, and letting us use their restroom facilities, letting us distribute flyers to them, which even the legal team said would be permissible. That would also now be criminal. The state is hostile to voter education. We need to let institutions fill the gaps. There's a lot of hardworking employees at the state who really care about this work, but if they're not able to work with other resources and third parties who have the time and resources to provide this sort of thing, then it's just not going to get done. We're not going to be able to plan for the midterms if this bill gets passed. We already had the Board of Registrars show support for our Election Day Off proposal on campus. One of the key reasons we need that is to train student poll workers because there are shortages of poll workers in Tuscaloosa. We can no longer do that work. We were planning on working with Greek Life and the Board of Registrars to get some type of competition or Greek points trading program where they would actually be, incentivized to become poll workers to address that shortage. And by canceling classes on Election Day, freeing up 30,000 people to do that on Election Day. We have a polling place at our university. Can we still arrange bus rides to get transportation to that polling place? Can we still advertise that polling place using our campus bus systems and campus dormitory systems? That ambiguity is just as chilling as the actual enforcement of the law, I think. The whole purpose of Vote Everywhere UA is to provide the sort of cross-institutional infrastructure that's needed to engage and enable students and other voters to participate democratically. And this bill criminalizes that behavior. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sam. At this time, we're going to open it up for Q&A. We're going to switch over to our Q&A portion. Okay, and the questions will pop up at the bottom of the screen. So I guess we can kick off Q&A. Okay, our first question. Has Wes Allen addressed the concerns that we have articulated today?
I would say in the recent conversation that I have, and I'll definitely let all our other panelists respond to this with Merrill, and also Alan was present on that call, has not addressed the concerns that we've articulated, just sort of throwing it under the bus like it's not going to impact grassroots movement or work on the ground that is specifically more for the employees, et cetera, et cetera. So no, but we are hoping that through this press conference and other gatherings we've been having that we would demand some type of conversation in regards to House Bill 194.
I'd like to also say that through some of the media interviews that regarding our opposition that we've had to this, we've had reporters talking to him about our concerns, and he has made comments like, we can go set up a little table wherever we want to set it up. And that was his first comment, as long as and then the rest of it was, it doesn't involve anybody else. But the thing that I think was really telling was last week during the floor debates, and Representative Drummond was talking to him about the concerns that they'd had during the last election about some of the people in prison who wanted to vote absentee, and that she and her senator, her fellow senator had gone to the sheriff and talked to the sheriff about how they could help the people who were in jail vote absentee, and they all reached an agreement that they would provide stamps to help pay for the person to mail in their absentee ballot. And she pressed him, and she had to press him several times, which I thought was just really a great. I mean, was good to watch, because finally he said that she was wanting to know who would be criminally liable, and he finally admitted it would be the sheriff. And so when he said that, then that's the chilling effect we're talking about, because if you basically make it where someone who has a job as a sheriff is going to be charged with a misdemeanor for working with an organization who is only trying to provide a stamps for absentee ballot or even the absentee application, if they're going to be charged with a misdemeanor, I would imagine that they might lose their job. That's going to be the chilling effect we're seeing. I think we had our answer right there on the intent.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Okay. What do you think will be the far-reaching effects if the bill passes the Senate?
I know we're all sort of waiting. Personally, I think that the far-reaching effect it'll be the voter turnout. We'll have less voter turnout. We've already struggled with the history in the state of Alabama for voting turnout. We've worked so hard to educate people and restore their rights to vote, especially for those who are currently incarcerated. And this is going to do nothing but turn the time backwards. Like Kathy said, to where people are able to vote with absentee ballot is amazing. And also in jails, outside of jails, not just formerly incarcerated people. It's going to impact the LGBTQ movement. There's already enough stimulations on them trying to get their IDs to be able to match their gender, transgender movement. And so this is going to do nothing but turn back the hands in time. And the intimidation will remain here, where people will not want to vote. And so that is the long lasting effect. And not only that, it sets us up to be able to continue to pass more ugly bills. If we don't win this one, it'd be more bills that are going to come forward that are going to diminish the vote totally.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I was gonna add that one of the things I see is happening is it's going to affect the ability for us to get accurate information, to be able to share it with voters, to make sure that people understand the issues, that they understand when they go to vote, or if they want to vote absentee, what are the requirements. Just being able to have a conversation with elected officials. There's going to be a barrier between us and them, which to me there should not be. We should be all working toward the same goals, and that I see a barrier. And I also see in Kansas, I've been told that in Kansas, the League of Women Voters, where this law is passed, has been told to stand down on voter registration because they're worried about their members getting prosecuted. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that's going to ever happen here, because, I think, there is right now, it appears to be targeted at people who are in the election officials or their staff. But, that concern I can understand. People don't want to be running the risk of going to jail if they've got a job that they might lose.
That's right. And Catherine, I want to add on that. That was a great point that you brought up about tying the hands of our local officials. I know we just came out of our ending our redistricting process, and we started a letter campaign to be able to bring the local officials and the community together, and not just the community, but the faith-based organization, the grassroots organizations. We made so much We made so much improvement in our collaboration and working with our local officials. And like you said, it's really going to tie their hands to where we can't work together, or it's going to, decrease our efforts in getting the vote out together. And that's something that we don't want to do. That's something that we've been pushing for, is for community and local officials and also organizations to work together to increase the vote and increase the power to put it back in our community. So thank you, Kathy, for lifting that up.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Marjorie. Okay. Mike Ottman. Mike says, maybe I missed this, but what is the problem they're trying to solve? And I'm assuming it's trying to figure out, what are they trying to solve, with HB 194? And that's typically the case, right? When we put a bill forth, we're solving some type of issue, right?
The only thing that I hear Representative Allen say over and over again is that he's trying to keep out-of-state money out of local elections. That is all he says. Now, I can't address his other motivations, but that's all he's saying publicly.
That's right.
I mean, I feel like it's the same as with the critical race theory thing, where the timing across all state legislatures just has no correlation with even the sort of suspected origins of critical race theory within education. I think it's really just a political decision. It's an election year. Voting restriction legislation is really popular because of contested results in the 2020 election. So I think people are hungry for that narrative. And I think that this bill is a good way to do that while appearing neutral on the surface. But really what this does is completely disarms the already resource-stripped state agencies responsible for keeping Alabamian democracy alive from doing their jobs.
Thank you. Let's see, Sailor Jones, what are election officials saying in response? Have any of you had any conversation with local election officials?
Yes, I think just to reiterate sort of what we were stating before, we've had some conversations behind closed doors with some of our elected officials. It still seems to me that there's a lot of confusion around the bill, and the confusion is around the language, particularly coming from Merrill, and understanding that. And so, it's wild to me how a bill can go forward, but there's still confusion within the legislators when they don't understand what's really going on with this bill. But I do know for some of the folks that we work directly with, I will not name them, that are against it totally, don't really see how this could even move forward, or don't even see how it could continue to be passed. But we all know that some bad bills get passed. So we have a very, I would say, a strong amount of elected officials who is not in agreement with this bill at all.
Yesterday, I talked to Secretary of State Merrill about this bill and was expressing my concerns about the things that we wanted to have changed. And he said that there were a lot of problems with this bill. He agreed that what we're pointing out is probably the worst part of the bill, but he said there were a lot of other issues. And so he's very concerned about this bill and feels like it needs a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, our next question. Who can do voter education or canvassing drives under this bill? Under this bill, what organizations can continue to do this type of work?
Well, I mean, the truth be told, I believe that organizations can still do the work, whether it be a nonprofit organization, faith organization, individual. You could still do the work as far as drivers and canvassing. What this bill is going to do is stop the funding from the private sectors to be able to go in to be used by state employees, elected officials, or what have you, to be able to collaborate with grassroots organizations. So it's not that it particularly would stop us from doing the work, but would stop us from being able to tap into the resources available to do our work, which is just as bad. And so basically, it's just attack to anybody that is going to do any type of voter engagement who has any connection with our local and state officials.
I agree.
Okay.
We're still gonna do what we do, but if there's a nuance that we need to get answers to certain questions, or if some citizen is having a problem, I'm not sure we're going to be able to help them like we have been in the past.
And I think it particularly compromises our ability to work with those populations that are more likely to be affected by policies that make voting more difficult, because state agencies are sort of the only places where people are regularly going where these types of things happen. I mean, you got to support a democracy within a democracy.
Okay. The next question, have conservative organizations given any support to pushing back on this bill, considering they are impacted also by this bill?
So I have not talked to any, but once again, Secretary of State Merrill told me he thought the Republican women's voting group should be they would be impacted as well. So I have not talked to them, and I don't know that they would go with us to oppose it, but they'll be impacted just like progressive groups would be.
Okay.
I don't want to speak for any particular organizations at UA, but from our early reports, we're seeing that this is seeing pretty bipartisan pushback among students.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. We had a conversation recently in Selma with a group from ASAP, Alabama Students Against Prisons, and they're definitely going to be pushing back on a lot of the people in the HBCU. So.
Okay. How does Allen reconcile this bill and his candidacy for Secretary of State? Any thoughts on that?
Well, let me just say that the League of Women Voters has invited him to participate in our Secretary of State candidate forum on the 26th of April so that he can answer questions, because I don't know.
Right. And I think that, like we stated, there has to be a major reconstruction in this bill in particular, and we would like to see what that would look like. Number one, I mean, not saying we're for it, but everybody has the right to speak their piece. We like to see that, and like Kathy said, if he would come before us and the community, and share his thoughts around it, then I can't say it's reconciliation, but at least it's a transparent conversation that is happening, so that we can understand what his frame of mind is on this.
Okay. Would pressuring board of registers to follow 17311 requiring visits to college and universities help them oppose this bill?
I think he's talking about the state code that requires registrars in each county, they're required to go to colleges or high schools. If there's, for example, up here in Madison County, they are required to go to every college, although, I'm not sure how many they're actually going to. And I think that's what he's getting at, because I talked to folks who've never seen them on their campuses. It would be interesting if they actually had to be visible when they go to these campuses. You might, and actually have a certain quota that they need to reach rather than just setting up a table.
Yeah, I've attended a 17311 tabling session, and we run about 6 of those of similar events of magnitude, even in non-election years, just to catch drifting students. it does not have a meaningful impact, one of those just small visits. It is all about institutional support and making sure that there are reliable mechanisms for voter education, communication, and outreach.
See,
Okay.
this is why this is really just trying to fill the gap. You know, what we're doing is filling the gap, because if they really wanted to fix the problem of people not getting registered and keeping their registration up to date, they would pass laws like automatic voter registration. But that's not happening. So this bill needs to go away because it's keeping us from doing what we're doing to try to patch the holes in this leaky boat.
Okay, our next question. Assuming that collaborative efforts to register and educate voters were replaced by state initiatives, best case scenario, how much more would it cost the state and taxpayers to maintain those services? Basically, how much money does allowing individuals and groups to fill those gaps save, state and taxpayers versus the state having to pay for the initiatives that we collaborate on?
So I don't know the answer to that. I do know that right now, if they did automatic voter registration using the DMV records, then a lot of the ability to reach people is there. And that's if you'd have to go in and look at the existing infrastructure to see if there were tools in place that you could reach voters to help them get their voter registration in place, up to date, and maintained as they move from county to county.
Right. And the money that is needed to fill those gaps vary. It varies from action to action of each organization that is doing the work. I mean, if we're trying to mobilize, and I hate to put a dollar on anything, but if we're trying to mobilize, let's say in municipal races, at least $15,000-$20,000. I mean, 20,000 voters. We're looking at it. 100,000 grand or more. So I think that any shift in this is going to come out of our taxpayers' dollars, because it's going to stop those, like I said, those private sector being able to provide the financials to support our work. So, it's still going to come at a cost, whatever that is.
Yeah, I think there's still a need for what Rodriguez talking about. Even if they had all the best voter services in the world at the state level, you're still going to need organizations who are out there working with individuals to help them in their situation directly.
That's right. And there's a lot of things that local officials can't do that our organizations, grassroots, and advocates can do. And this is why we can't pass this bill, because we need each other. You know what I'm saying? We have a great partner with Commissioner Sheila Tyson, and as her being the commissioner, there's certain things that she cannot do. However, organizations such as us, we're able to do on the ground. And so, we have to think about that money resource that is needed to be able to do that. So, it's gonna, like I said, it's just detrimental, and it's really sad that we're even at this point in 2022 in the state of Alabama that we having this conversation about this bill.
Yeah, so I also want to add, just now, in Representative West Allen just released a statement in the Troy Messenger, their edition for today, accusing organizations like the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition of creating false narratives about the bill. He says, and I quote, HB 194 does not in any way make it illegal for grassroots organizations to collaborate with local election officials to educate and help voters get out the vote, in quotes. But on March 8th, Allen is also quoted by WSFA as saying that nonprofit organizations can educate and assist the public themselves, but not in coordination with the government. I would love to know you all's thought about his new statements today in comparison to his, the previous statements, as it seems, to be a direct contradiction.
So I'll be happy to kick that discussion off and say that I think what he keeps pushing back on is ignoring the word personal services. He's focusing on money, and he's trying to keep people like Zuckerberg from putting any money into local elections in the state, and he thinks he may truly think that somehow saying personal services doesn't hamper anyone, but it does. And that kind of language, when you put that in there, it doesn't relate to money. You're talking about people power, and you're talking about people, they're putting their heart and soul into getting people ready to vote, and that is the problem. When he puts that in there and says that if an election official that they cannot accept personal services from an individual or non-governmental organization, then he is putting the threat of a criminal misdemeanor on an election official or their staff. Is also making these organizations fearful that they may be getting caught up in legal battle as well. So, he's not right. I mean, he is missing the point.
Thank you.
I mean, it doesn't really matter much if I'm going to go to jail for trying to work with a government organization, if the election official will go to jail, because then the collaboration still won't happen. I mean, it might be true that it's not illegal for me to go up there, but if it's illegal for them to speak with me, then the effect is the same. I don't, it seems like that argument also just invalidates the entire purpose of the bill. It's like either the bill does nothing or what the bill does is bad, and he doesn't really seem to have much of a response outside of that.
It's kind of like throwing a big wet blanket over all of voting rights in Alabama and then saying it doesn't affect what we're doing. I mean, we're not an island unto ourselves. We have to work with these election officials. And what he's saying is that we can go set up a table somewhere and work on it by ourselves. That is not realistic.
Yeah. And like Nisha said, it's a big contradiction. I'm trying to figure out how Governor Kay Ivey is still able to use COVID relief funds to build this mega. That is a obvious contradiction to the funding, but yet we can't work with our governmental official. And the strong word is collaborate. And what does that mean to collaborate? That is my question to Wes Allen. What does that mean to collaborate? Will they get in trouble for speaking to us? Will they get in trouble for helping provide? What does the word collaboration in the terms of being criminalized or punished as elected official mean? And so, I just think it's an all around contradiction, and we just have to call it what it is. It is unclear, and it needs to be clearly rewritten or explained in the context that it's supposed to serve its purpose. Because right now it's not serving its purpose at all, and it will not serve a purpose, but to stop the funding from coming to, like some of the panelists said, to some of the government officials who really have a heart for voter engagement at every level. It will impact that. So,
yeah. As we are coming to the end of our hour, I want to just pose a question out there. What is the most important story you would like media outlets to share in their community about the opposition to this bill? As we know, it's important that we put, true and adequate information out there for the public as we raise awareness. So I want to give each of you a moment to just share, what would you like our brothers and sisters in the media to report as they report on this story?
I would first start by saying that we are tired of this type of opposition. We are saddened by the response of the state when it comes to providing opportunities for citizens to cast their vote at every level, and to let all media outlets know that we will continue with, whether this bill passes or not, to provide the proper voter education, because it is their dignity and their right, constitutional right, that they are able to know how to cast their vote. So that's what I would say.
Okay. Would any of you like to add to that?
I mean, to me, this law just comes across like saying that you're not allowed to use the letter Y or letter Z when doing voter education work, and that it is totally arbitrary, doesn't save resources or even really intend to save resources, but instead is just creating an artificial barrier to a problem that really needs to be solved. State agencies need our help, and we need state agencies' help. State agencies have the benefit of existing for a long time and having policy that keeps it being relatively the same thing over time. And we have the opposite advantage, which is that advocacy groups are flexible, flexibly funded. We have time to do things like research, switch projects, etc. But unless that institutionalization and sort of short-term advocacy perspective can interact, then you're just totally cutting us off from the people that we're trying to help, which is all citizens of Alabama.
Yeah, I agree with all of the comments that you made, and I wanted to just have reporters share with communities that we're all on the same team, and we're all part of Alabama, and we're trying to help make it possible for all Alabama citizens to be able to participate in the democratic process. We want to protect democracy. Right now, what we're seeing in this bill is a bad bill that's not addressing a problem that really needs to be addressed. There's not a problem. The groups such as ours are out there trying to help citizens vote. We're working collaboratively with the election officials. This bill would serve only to make that relationship more confusing and more complex. It would introduce fear and division when we should not. And I would just say that the main message is it's not about the money. It's about the people. And it's about the people who are helping others get ready to vote. And whenever you hear Representative Allen say, we're just trying to cut outside money, the League of Women Voters is all volunteer. We have no money that we're putting into these elections. We're people out there trying to help other people. Same with a lot of these other groups, and not just the ones here today. We're out there helping and trying to help, and we don't need laws like this, which would end up making it harder for us to do what we need to do to help Alabama vote.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to our speakers today. Thank you all for providing such insightful and impactful information. I encourage our viewers to contact your senator. There's a bit.ly link on the bottom of the screen if you don't know who that is, and tell them to vote no, that this is a bad bill. And as Kathy said, this is about the people. And as we come to a close, I encourage you to stick around for a few moments just to learn a little bit more information about the organizations that make up the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition. We'll have a little video that'll play at the end to share that information with you. And we'll also share some of the comments that you all were putting in the chat. Thank you for conversing amongst yourselves and being involved in today's public briefing. Again, just want to leave you with that this is about people. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.